Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to tonight's story of Dogman Stories. We have an encounter here with Zarina from Salisbury, Pennsylvania, in a small community also known as Coal Run. So, without further ado, Dogman Stories, Unnatural Dogs. The year was 1994 in Salisbury, Pennsylvania, in a small community referred to as Coal Run. My parents, who at the time had three small children, found a very large house for sale in that area. It was perfect to raise a family in, not too close to town, back in the woods, and there were a few neighbors here and there. Not too many though, just close enough if you needed help you could get it, so it was perfect. My parents finally purchased the house. At the time I was 3 or 4, so not much of a help packing or moving stuff. I do remember walking into the house for the first time. It was horrible. Someone, or something, had been living in there. Trash, diapers, pizza, leaves, and even sticks were everywhere in this house. It was nasty. So before we moved in, my parents cleaned this house from top to bottom. Fresh paint, new carpet, it was perfect. A new home smell, and it was now a home. I couldn't help but notice the feeling of being watched the entire time my family was clearing and cleaning the home out. I know I was real young at the time, but I do remember that feeling of being watched and feeling scared, like the woods were watching, waiting. The day our beds arrived at the new home was the first night we got to spend there. I was really excited, playing with my toys in my new room and meeting the neighbors and playing with new kids my age. I was a little girl, but I had older brothers that loved to play outside and was always in the woods, so I followed them around when I could. At times I found myself alone. They seemed to always run off and leave me. So more than once I found myself walking back to the house alone. I never really thought nothing of it. At the time we were just kids living the country life. About a week after we had moved completely in the house and everything was in order, I had went to bed one night rather early, only to be woke up later to my mom standing at the window in her room. I'm not sure what woke me up at the time, but something did. My mom was standing at her window with her shotgun. She had the gun pointed at the window, aiming at something. Before I could even ask what she was trying to shoot, she yells at me to get down. So I hit the floor fast, and bang! She reloads. Bang! Sitting in the floor, holding my ears, I yelled to her, Mama, what is it? She didn't even look at me. Sit there and be quiet, girl. They're trying to get in. I was scared. I tried to look, but she wouldn't let me. She loaded that gun up again, and bang! I got one! I heard dogs, so I wanted to see, but she said no. I got it, so go back to bed now. Everything's all right. They're gone. She patted me on the head and gave me a kiss and put me back to bed. Well, the next morning I came down the stairs, and that's when I realized the entire house was full of people. They were all talking to each other back and forth, but as soon as they seen me, they stopped. It was very odd. Most of them went outside and continued to talk, not wanting me to hear what was being said. I hated being so young. I hated when parents withheld information because they didn't want to scare the kids. Looking back now, that might have been some good information to know about, but we know how adults are. They are only trying to protect us. They didn't know nothing about this thing back in the early 90s. After that, my mom decided to get a dog. She felt a dog would warn us if the unnatural dogs came around. I was so happy she got a dog. We called him Jack. Jack the Ripper. Jack and I were the best of friends. We were inseparable. There was only one problem. Jack wasn't allowed in the house. He was a very big dog, German Shepherd and Wolf, a retired police dog, so he knew how to protect and serve. He was perfect. Some nights I would sneak outdoors and go sleep in his doghouse with him. I felt safe and warm. Even my dad wasn't able to yell at me without Jack running to my aid to protect me, so sleeping outside with Jack wasn't a problem. I knew he was there to protect me. And at the time, I knew of the unnatural dogs, but I didn't know the unnatural dogs, their intentions and capabilities, not to mention their strength. Hell, at that time, I didn't even know what they looked like, which was probably a good thing. Well, days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. A few months had passed, and everything was fine, or so I thought. I decided to go out into the woods one day. I was just up there seeing what was up there, doing normal kid stuff, when all of a sudden I heard Jack barking hysterically. Now Jack was back at the house for some reason. He was on a log chain that day. I'm not sure why, but if anyone knows what a log chain is, you know it's heavy and it's big. Well, I was looking at him, watching him cutting flips and doing laps, and trying his damnedest to get loose, when all of a sudden a stick broke behind me. I spun around to see who it was. Nothing. Hmm. Okay, so I turned back around, looking at my dog. He was looking directly at me, quiet as could be. So I turned around and started to head into the woods, when I heard running and thrashing in the woods headed toward me. I couldn't see anything. I got scared. I didn't know what to do. I started to head back towards the house, and Jack went crazy again. And all of a sudden, everything went quiet. I stopped. Looking at Jack, I heard growling behind me. I slowly turned around. The unnatural dogs were back. They were very unnatural looking. At first it was on all four growling at me. Then it stood on its back 2 feet as if it was normal for it, standing behind a tree now on 2 feet still growling at me. It had its head leaning forward more than the rest of the body, growling, using one human-like hand with claws to hold on to the tree as if to keep it from tipping over. I could still hear my dog going crazy, but I didn't know what to do. There were a few birds chirping in the trees above me, but everything else was silent. This thing was black as night and big. So freaking big. It just stared at me, still growling. I was in such shock. I couldn't even move. I couldn't even yell. I just stood there while it started to come closer to me. It was heading right at me. I backed up to a tree slowly, scared to death and in shock. I just slid down the tree with my back and pulled my knees to my chest and buried my head. I didn't know why I did that. Still to this day I cannot answer that question on why I did that. Shock, I guess. I just sat there for what felt like hours with tears running down my cheeks. I did not know what was about to happen. I could hear it right at my head growling. I didn't dare look up. I didn't even hear my dog anymore. I heard a few birds chirping around me as if they were staring at me, wondering what was about to happen themselves. This was it. I was going to be ate by a monster. I felt its breath on me as it was growling lowly next to my head. All of a sudden, my dog comes out from behind this thing and messes with it for a second or two to get it up away from me, and runs right to me trying to pull me up. And then I realize it's Jack. Oh, Jack. I get up finally. The monster's still there. I basically hop on the dog's back and he hauls ass with me holding on to his fur. I seen the creature reach out and grab the tip of Jack's tail with fingers and claws like a werewolf. That's when I finally realized this thing is a werewolf. Oh my God, a werewolf? We have werewolves running around out here? Jack, still hauling ass to the house, made it to the porch and dumped me off, and basically pushed me up into the house. I ran inside thinking he was coming, only to turn around and see him bolt back towards the woods after the werewolf. I heard fighting and howling, but I was afraid to go back out, so I waited for Jack to come back home. I waited and waited and waited. Minutes turned into hours. I was worried. My mother had came home from work about 4 o'clock, and I did not mention to her the events of that day, nor did I mention Jack's whereabouts. My mother came up to my room to talk with me that night. She asked me about Jack, and I told her he was out in the woods, trying not to seem worried. By this time it was 8:30, and he wasn't home yet. I feared he had been killed, but had no way to verify it unless I went out in the woods. My mom sat there on my bed for a few minutes as if she had something to say, but looked confused. So I asked her, "Is everything okay, Mom?" She signed. "Well, I want you to promise me that you will stay close to the house and do not go in or near the woods." As she was saying that to me, I could not help but think she had somehow knew what happened today. "Why?" I asked her. "Well, there's been some stuff going on with them unnatural dogs, and they might be dangerous. People's pets are coming up missing, so I want you to promise me you will not go into the woods. Also, while I'm not home, you nor your brothers are allowed outside. Understood?" "Yes, Mama." "Okay, well, good night, baby. I'll see you in the morning." I did not sleep at all that night. I waited and waited to hear Jack bark, but he never did. I would glance out of my window and look towards the woods, but nothing. Morning came. Apparently I dozed off waiting for Jack. I jumped up and ran downstairs to see Jack. He was not back. I knew he had been killed. I could feel it. I started crying. I just turned around and went back to my room. I stared out the window and could hear the birds chirping all around. I stayed in my room for days crying. My mother came to my room one evening and asked me what was wrong. I told her all about the werewolf and how it had killed Jack. She smiled, walked out of the room, and came back in, and Jack sped past her and leaped right on top of me, smashing me to the floor. I did not care that Jack had smushed me to the floor. I was so happy. It had been a week and he had finally come back. Even my pet birds were so happy they were chirping around and jumping everywhere. Mama said he was laying on the porch this morning, and he looked tired as if he had been fighting for days. I just wonder how far he ran them werewolves off, if he had only ran the one or all of them off. I wasn't sure, but I was glad to have him home. Years had passed without incident, so I thought. I was talking with a man who had an encounter himself, and he convinced me to share my story. I told my mother about it again to see if she would remember me telling her that day in my bedroom. She smiled at me and said, "Honey, I knew you were telling the truth as soon as you told me." That night in the bedroom, I was shooting at something that looked like a werewolf. There was about three of them, if I remember correctly, and I know I shot one of them. I killed it. Your daddy chopped it up and threw it out along the woods, hoping they wouldn't come back. Perhaps it pissed them off, 'cause it didn't help none. I started getting calls from the neighbors saying that my little girl was about to be attacked by these things, that they were stalking you every time you went in the woods. No one called me the day you told me about what happened to you. That's why I got Jack. After that first call, I knew you kids wouldn't stay in the house and would go near the woods, so I hoped the dog would help. God bless his heart, he saved your life more than once, child. You just didn't know it.